let's go. Okay. So the next section, phone off here, for the Cholim of Klal Yisrael. These words of Torah, games and toys. This section is not comprehensive, but aims to present a few principles relating to children's games and toys. Children may play ball games if they are not in an open area. One should ensure that a ball will not be thrown or kicked into another's premises to avoid malacha or carrying. Children may play running and jumping games such as hide and seek and jump rope. They may play on monkey bars, seesaws, and swings, but a swing may not be used if it is attached to a tree. Children may not be allowed to play with electronic or computer games. Mechanical, non-electric wind-up toys are permitted. Dice games such as snakes and ladders are permitted. It is also permitted to play games such as chess and checkers, or drafts, as people say in South Africa. At the end of any game, one may not sort pieces or playing cards in their colors, so this constitutes selecting or boire, which is not for immediate use. Certain authorities permit children to play games in which letters are loosely placed together to form words or pieces from pictures. This is a view which permits building blocks or Lego to be used, since they are not fixed tightly together and are erected only temporarily. Games requiring the coloring, cutting, or sticking of articles are prohibited. Plasticine and Play-Doh may not be used, and games associated with writing, sewing, and weaving may not be played. And last point, toys made for the purpose of sounding noises of music, such as bells or xylophones, are prohibited. But one is permitted to make whistling or chirping noises with one's mouth without the use of an instrument. Okay, let's continue the next time we have the share. Another couple of points, but we'll do that next time.
Yeah.
Before you all start throwing your toys, I'm going over time.
No, Kev, quick question. What about the guy that has his human boombox? Is he allowed to make noises like music?
Yeah. Yes, he can, because it's chirping. Chirping is a form of like a bird singing. They chirp too much.
You thought you couldn't whistle. I was told
my wife is chirping me. And that's obviously allowed, right?
It said so. Well, let's just check. Go back 1 second. Sounding noises or music, one is permitted to make whistling or chirping. So chirping is chirping like singing, made with one's mouth.
Chirping doesn't apply anywhere else, I
Okay,
think.
guys.
Chirp. All right, let's
go. Put this book down 1 second.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's get started. We don't have an inordinate amount of time. Okie dokie. Gavin, would you like to read?
Yeah, sure. Okay. The previous Mishnah discussed the law of wool within the context of an ox or a donkey falling into it. He chooses these examples in keeping with the verse Exodus 21.33. If a man shall uncover a pit and an ox or a donkey shall fall into it. The following Mishnah teaches this law as well as several other laws are not restricted to these species but apply to all animals and fowl. The same law that applies to an ox applies also to any domestic animal. In regard to payment of damages for its falling into a pit, in regard to the forced separation from Mount Sinai at the giving of the Torah, in regard to the twofold payment a thief must make for stealing an animal, and in regard to returning lost object, in regard to unloading an animal, in regard to the provision of muzzling an animal when it is threshing, in regard to the provisions of kalayim, i.e. mating or playing with diverse species together, in regard to the prohibition, against having one's animal work on the Sabbath. In every one of these 8 cases, the same rules that apply to an ox or a donkey apply to all domestic animals. Moreover, any wild beast or bird is legally the same as the domestic animals in regard to these 8 issues. If so, why is specifically an ox or a donkey mentioned in connection with falling into a pit? Why are there similar specifications in other cases. It is not because the laws are restricted to these species, rather it's because Scripture speaks of the usual case.
Very well read, Gav. All right, so listen, this is exactly what Kevin, funny enough, mentioned the other day when we had this discussion. Kevin said, look, it mentions the donkey and the ox specifically because they're the most common animals. So we had that discussion in the beginning of 2b where we said, look, does the Torah mention it because it's the most common, or we adhere to the law because the Torah mentions it? And the thing of it is both. Is the Torah will take obviously the most frequently used examples, and in certain cases it's specified to those examples. In other cases, it is the archetypal example and extrapolated to other examples within the same genre, whether it's animals or whether it's situational, etc. So, Kev, well done. It was almost fortuitous last time when you mentioned that. So I was quite excited. That was very well done. Now, just wanted to discuss a couple of issues with you guys, because when you first read it, it kind of knocks you off kilter a bit. Because the first thing that we're learning is about the fact that an ox applies to any domestic animal. That makes sense. There's certainly no problem as far as that's concerned. But what you've got to learn is that the term like behemoth, although it refers to a domesticated species of animals, cows, sheep, goats, etc., the Mishnah states below that the same law also applies to a chaya. So a chaya is a wild animal. We have the word chaya from the word life, a living animal, a living creature, but it has no owner. So we need to discuss how you could be liable in certain cases with regards to the fact that it's a wild animal. So what we're going to discuss is in upcoming dafs, well, how do you then take over a wild animal, and in terms of liabilities, etc., and what's involved. But in the meantime, just know that the behemoth is not just a classification for domestic species. It could also refer to a wild animal, even birds. Okay, so what this issue is with Mount Sinai? How many of you guys actually made to prepared a little bit? Arth, did you prepare? Arthur?
No, I didn't prepare. I haven't prepared.
All right. So Arthur, suddenly one starts to read the word. Okay, so you're looking at damages of ox and donkey, and it's extrapolated to mean any domestic animal. What does this mean? A domestic animal is one that is in the current category of a workhorse like sheep and goats, etc. People in those days, they never had animals like dogs or cats for amusement. It was an agricultural and agrarian society, and they did animal husbandry to breed animals because you needed the fur, the milk, the meat, etc. But it wasn't really this concept where people had pets for amusement. So also when it talks about a wild animal, it's talking about if you if you've got a wild animal for a particular use. Give me an example. Would you say, for example, Arthur, if you had a lion on your premises, it's unlikely that people would break in?
Yeah.
Pretty much, especially if you didn't feed it all that often. And you had the odd oak.
Giving me ideas, James. Giving me ideas.
The odd oak from the township that used a crowbar to get into the bars, and then that would be easy pickings for the animal. So that's easy to understand how a slightly wilder animal would be included, because it can, in fact, have an owner. But this issue of, in regard to the forced separation from Mount Sinai at the giving of the Torah, do you know what that means, Of? Because it seems like a completely unrelated subject. Do you want me to explain it to you?
Yeah, give it a shot.
Okay, so basically what happened is you had the Shekhinah, you had the divine presence. And when the Torah was given on Har Sinai, nobody was allowed to touch the mountain. Anybody that would come into contact with this edge would die. Okay? It didn't matter if they were human beings and animals. And this was a bit of a new one to me, because I realized human beings obviously might be cognizant and might be crossing boundaries. And in that way, that they actually died, or it affected their soul differently to an animal. I thought an animal might not die as a result. We even learn, do you remember when they had the, Kevin, what was that in the ark when they were moving and they had the Mishkan and it accidentally fell and one of the guys touched it and he died? Who was that guy?
I don't remember. I don't know. Actually, I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't know.
And I don't know that story. Gavin maybe knows.
So even with the best intent, if animals went up to the mountain, you wouldn't come to it. Even if you went towards the mountain, that immediately your soul would leave your body. So where was this from? From Exodus chapter 19, verse 12 to 13. It said, Arthur, beware of ascending the mountain or touching its edge. So whoever touches the mountain, whether behemoth or person, he shall not live. So that's where we learn the word that behemoth is not only a domesticated animal, but any animal that touches it. That we just extrapolate the word chaya, a wild animal. Any creature that touched it would die, even a bird. So the Torah also employs the word behemoth, a domestic animal, and that requirement of a separation that's applied to wild beasts and birds only occurs in certain cases. That's according to Rashi. Okay, so what happened was the divine presence remained upon Har Sinai from the period of giving of the Torah in Sivan. Okay, which is what do you call it? June, July. It's the Hebrew astrological figure of Gemini, until the Jews traveled from there in the following year. And where do you see this? In Numbers chapter 10 to 11, and the restriction against touching the mountain was enforced throughout this period. Okay, so what are we learning from this? So Arthur, why does it mention, and in regard to forced separation from Mount Sinai at the giving of the Torah, how does this relate to the Mishnah?
I'm lost today, Dan. I'm not even thinking.
I know, but that's why I'm grilling you.
No, I'm.
Damon?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm blank.
He's used to grilling because he grills schnitzels all the time. So that's a good word. But anyway, just jokes aside, I think it's going to come to the point that talking about distinguishing which animals can be together. It said kilayon there, which is two species or two materials which are not allowed to mix.
We're going to get to
is that the preamble to this?
Yeah, no, we're going to get to the Kilayim part. What it's actually mentioning here is, look, the minute you see ox and donkey, this is the archetypal restriction on living things.
Yeah.
So when you say that those animals get damaged in a pit, you can extrapolate from there that you're talking about any animal, basically. Even a creature that doesn't carry tumah through the carcass. So that's where it comes to include birds. So it's going to show all these examples. And the reason why it mentions the separation at Mount Sinai is it's just bringing the point that when you mention the word behemoth, which is a domesticated animal, it includes even people that touch the mountain, wild animals, everything is included within that list of living creatures. So that was the second example, right? Then the third example from the Mishnah is in regard to the twofold payment a thief must make for stealing an animal. So let me just explain to you what that means. So it says, and in regard to the forced separation from Mount Sinai at the giving of the Torah, and in regard to the twofold payment a thief must make for stealing an animal. So what actually happens as far as that's concerned, I'm just gonna share the screen again, just so you guys can follow in terms of what I'm saying, because if you haven't done Chazorah, it's not going to help if I explain it without reading it. Okay, so fine. And in regard to the twofold payment a thief must make for stealing an animal, I'm sure you guys are going to ask what question, guys?
What animal?
Well, so far it's saying, look, if there's an ox or firstly, there's three questions. If it's an ox or a donkey, and it's referring to if you shall steal an ox or a sheep and a donkey, it means if you steal any animal, you have to make the payment.
Double.
But the question you should be asking yourself is, why twofold payment? We firstly realize that there's a distinction between two different types of animal. So for an ox, you pay the primary repayment amount times 4, and for a sheep, the primary repayment amount times 3, which means you pay 5 times the amount for an ox because it's the initial returning of the stolen item value plus a penalty of 4. And then for a sheep, a penalty of 3 plus the primary payment equals 4 in total. So there's a difference of 4 or 5. So how can you extrapolate from there that to say that when you, firstly, if an ox damages you, that you would pay the same amount, because we already know that you don't pay the same amount for an ox or a sheep. Gavin brought up the point originally that you pay more for an ox because it weighs heavier. And I'll explain to you, Gav, just as a summary, no, that's not the case, because you're paying on percentage, okay? So if the ox is worth 400 zuz, right, you would pay whatever that animal is worth based on weight, plus your penalties. So naturally a sheep of which you are is lighter. That's not why you're paying less, because you're still paying the full portion of the sheep, plus you're paying the compensatory amount. The reason why you pay less penalties for a sheep than an ox, because an ox you're actually paying times 5. The primary refunding amount plus a penalty of 4 times the amount, and a sheep, the primary amount plus the 3-fold penalty, which is payment of 4 times. It's because with a sheep, you leave it in an undignified manner by having the sheep on your shoulders and escaping with it to try and keep it quiet. Whereas an ox, you can lead it out with dignity so that when somebody sees you, it doesn't look like you're stealing the animal. So for that part that you're having a dignity, you make full payment. When you're embarrassing yourself by stealing, that takes away some of the sting in terms of the amount of penalty times you pay. Does that make sense?
That's a genius. Yeah, thank you, Damon. I always wanted to know why. Thank you.
Sure. But the problem with so far is that we say, in regard to the twofold payment a thief must make for stealing an animal, we learned that there's not a twofold payment. Because, Arthur, what did we learn is if I steal a laptop, we learned it was a kanas. So if I came before there were witnesses against me and said, I did wrong, I stole the laptop, here's the laptop, or I already sold the laptop and here's the money, we don't make the person pay the penalty. Same with the animal. It's only if you have aidem against you and it goes all the way to court, because it's considered a penalty. So there's a penalty amount and the compensatory amount. So the compensatory amount is the primary repayment, and then you don't have to make penalties if you admit to it before you trouble the court. Does that make sense? But what we learned is that there's not a twofold payment for stealing an animal. There's a fourfold and a 5-fold payment for stealing.
So I did see, I think what this is, why it says twofold, because I was reading it, but I didn't go into full detail, but I think it's because it's still in your possession. Is that the reason or not? Why it says twofold here? That's what I was thinking.
But I understood where you got it, because in Shmot, chapter 24, in Shmot, chapter 22, verse 3, it says, if the theft shall be found in his possession, whether live ox or donkey or sheep, he shall pay double. So what I want you to do is ignore the word whether a live ox or donkey or sheep or goat, he shall pay double. I'd rather you read the pasuk as saying, if the theft shall be found in his possession, he shall pay double. Because there's a different payment with regards to certain animals that you steal. Okay? Because there's another theft penalty in a different verse. If you're looking at the verse of Shmot, Exodus chapter 21, verse 37, it says, if a man shall steal an ox, a sheep, or a goat, and slaughter or sell it, he shall pay 5 cattle in the place of an ox, and 4 sheep in the place of a sheep. However, those multiple penalties only apply to those species that are listed. So, therefore, we can extrapolate that if you steal other animals, yes, you have to pay a penalty of double. and you can extrapolate that for all animals, but it's slightly different with regards to an ox and a sheep. That's what I want you to bear in mind. Based on
it doesn't matter. So you pay that penalty even if it's in your possession. The same, the 4 times the 5, even if it's in your possession.
Well, if it's in your possession, that's exactly why you pay, because you never admitted it. In other words, you were caught with it in your possession. It's at that point that they aid him against you, and it's too late to confess at that point. Because it's fine if you come to the court and said, I've done wrong, I'm going to pay, etc. But if there are witnesses against you, at that point, it's too late to come clean. It's like, do you get what I'm saying? You can't convict yourself with your own testimony. So if you've murdered somebody or whatever the case may be, but there are no witnesses, they can't give you the death penalty. And if you admit to it, I don't know what happens as far as that's concerned, but you can't be your own prosecutor. So the best thing to do is that you can have a race. That if somebody views you with it, you quickly go to the closest base din and admit you've done wrong before the witnesses can testify. If you get there first.
James?
Yeah?
Can I ask you a question? What's to do with the ox and the sheep, and then when you go down to, let's say, to a lesser animal, is it because it's almost in what people prefer stealing? They like to steal ox and sheep, but they don't really steal other animals as much because it's not as beneficial, or what?
Honestly, what's going to happen is when we hit the 7th chapter of Bava Kamma, it's going to concentrate on this issue at length. Okay?
Okay.
So the truth of it is I have no idea why it's so high. I know you're not going to do it again. You know, but in other words, if a person steals a normal object, you must return it. So basically, for the value, okay, to its rightful owner, and you must additionally pay the owner a penalty equal to its value. So the first amount is compensatory, and the second amount is the penalty. That's why they say a twofold payment. But what it's saying is that anything that's found in your possession, you don't even have to extend it to living things. You could have it, as far as that's concerned, to inanimate objects. And we're going to learn this on the 62nd daf.
Okay. James?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to clarify something. If I go steal an ox and somebody catches me and I go witnesses, I'm going to pay 1 to 4, right? Well, I'm going to pay basically 5, okay? What happens if I steal the ox and then say, look, I stole your ox, I want to give it back to you before anything happens? Is it still 1 to 4 or 5 in total, or is it 1 to 3?
No. Let me clarify something there a second. Okay. What I'm saying is, if I say I pay you 5-fold or 4-fold, I'm actually paying you the penalty. If I say 5-fold for the ox, I'm paying you 4 times as the penalty, and the first amount being the compensatory amount. So say your ox is worth 100 zuz. Okay, I pay you 500 zuz. The first 100 zuz is to compensate you for your loss if I don't have the ox. And the other 400 zuz is the penalty of 4 times the initial payment. So the 4 times is the penalty, and the first time is the repayment, is the compensatory amount. So it's a
that's with 2 witnesses, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Is it the 2 witnesses? But let's say, for example, you steal the ox, right? And then you have a moment of regret and you bring it back.
Fine. You just have to, there's no penalty. You just have to return the value of what you stole, all the item and stuff.
Okay.
So what we have to learn here is that it extends it to culpability both for other living creatures. That's what we're learning in the Mishnah. Whenever you see ox or donkey, it extrapolates to other living creatures that if you stole it, you have to make restitution if it's in your possession, and even to inanimate objects, which is in 62b. But what the only thing is I want you to read is that when you're reading that verse, an ox or a donkey, and not an ox or donkey. A donkey is, for some reason, I think it's double like everything else, but an ox and a sheep. There it's the 4-fold and 5-fold. But the only thing of it is that pasuk is quite weird, Gavin. If the theft shall be found in his possession with a live ox or donkey or sheep or goat, he shall pay double. And then how do you learn then, if it just says straightforward, he shall pay double, how do you learn that an ox or a sheep is actually 4-fold and 5-fold if the pasuk says that? I'm looking forward to getting there. I have no idea. Okay, let's just go on. All right. All we're learning from here is when you read a certain animal, you can extrapolate it to other animals in terms of responsibility for repayment. And it says, in regard to returning a lost object. Okay, let me just share the screen. Okay, so what do we mean in regard to returning a lob? It states, Gavin, in Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 1. Do you remember we did that last week? You shall not see the ox of your brother or his sheep or his goat going astray and hide yourself from them. You shall surely return them to your brother. And then obviously from that mitzvah, it encompasses any lost animals that you have to return, even if it mentions sheep or donkey. And we even learn everything further. It says, and in regard to unloading an animal. Okay? So, Arthur, how it starts off isn't it in Mishpatim, Kevin? Where it says,
that's a judgment, so Mishpatim, like what penalties or...
it says, after the 10 Commandments, that first parsha, that basically you're obligated to assist in unloading the burden from an animal struggling
of your enemy,
load, right? It was in
specifically says of your enemy.
Of your enemy.
Even so, then, yeah.
Exactly. So that's in Shmot chapter 22, verse 5. So Arthur, what it talks about there with regards to your enemy is one of the ways that you create shalom is that if your enemy is struggling with the problem, say his car's stuck on the highway, right? And you help him change a tire, do you think he will have such splitting animosity towards you in future?
No.
So what it does is it not only helps unburden the animal's pressure, but it helps foster good relationships with the person. So exactly that. It says, if you see the donkey of someone you hate crouching under its burden, would you refrain from helping him? You shall help him repeatedly. This mitzvah applies to all laden animals, not just donkeys. What do we mean, all laden animals? Any animal that's got a load on it, and not just your enemy. In other words, it's teaching your enemy to say that it helps foster good relationships. But any animal that's having a load that's creating a burden, you've got saleh ba'achayim, which means you can't create cruelty to any living creature. So you've got to loosen the load and assist that animal. So whether it's your enemy, your friend, for the people's relationship's sake, or for the animal's sake, it's got multiple benefits. Okay, so obviously in the Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 4, it speaks about an ox or donkey. But not only can you apply it to all other animals, you can even apply it to people. Why? If you see somebody struggling with the load, nobody's going to tell you, the parsha only applies to animals, because if you're going to help an animal, even more so, it's logical that you help a fellow human being. That doesn't even need to be stated. Okay. So read the next words, Arthur.
Okay, from where? I'm trying to figure.
And in regard to unloading an animal, we've just discussed that.
I just want to bring it to a bigger screen so I can see where I'm looking at here. I'm trying to find it. Sam applies of the animal in regard. I actually have no idea where it is because the screen is full.
Okay, it doesn't matter. I'll read.
Just tell me top, middle, bottom.
It's the middle.
The middle. Okay, and the in regard to the prohibition, no, it's Muslim.
Yes, that's it. Just read it.
In regard to twofold or the one that's forced.
And in regard to the prohibition of muzzling an animal when it's threshing.
Okay. And in regard to the prohibition of muzzling an animal when it is threshing, and in the regard to the prohibition of kilayim, therefore...
Hang on, you've gone too far. So basically, what it's saying is, guys, do you know what threshing is? Do you want me to explain it?
It's like with wheat, to get the chaff out and to separate the...
Exactly. It's the separation of grain or wheat. You're basically taking generally, if you see it mechanized, it's a revolving mechanism. So what happens is you build a drum. In the old days, they take, what you do in Hoshana Rabbah, you smash your lulav and you thresh it, etc. But what you do is when you're bashing it, you're separating the kernel grains of corn from the disposable part, or the grain or the wheat from the chaff, exactly as Kevin said. But with a more sophisticated agricultural method is they would put it in a barrel, and the oxen would pull it, and it would just rotate. It would be like a drum, Arth. So it's like moving it violently. You have to. So a creature would move the stuff violently so that it would separate the good from the bad. That's all it means. So you're not allowed to muzzle an animal. Why are you not allowed to muzzle an animal? Because an animal is entitled to eat in between some of the stuff that it picks up. It generally doesn't eat the good stuff, the animal. It doesn't eat the grains of kernel or the wheat. It eats bales of hay or the stuff that's left over. So you can't. It's cruel to have an animal working with food and not being able to partake of that food. So when it mentions an ox or a donkey, what it's coming to say is whenever you read the word ox or donkey, any animal that's doing agricultural work for you, you can't muzzle. I'm not talking about a carnivorous, dangerous animal, but an omnivore or a herbivore, so that it can partake of food and it's not surrounded by food doing work for you and cruelly chalishing for it. Okay, read the next line off.
Share the screen again, Damon.
Oh, sorry, guys.
I need to screen back. Go back to the other one. Okay, share it. No, make it big again. Okay. Let me see where I was. Okay, and in regard to the prohibition of kilayim, therefore matting or plowing with diverse species together.
So kilayim is, for example, you can't. Part of the rules of kilayim is that you can't mix with clothing, Kevin. It became from Cain and Abel, Arth, according to their offerings in the conflict that came up. It's something called
shatnez. Yeah, well, yeah, exactly, shatnez. Yeah.
So shatnez
wool and linen. Yeah.
Is when you're mixing cotton with
no, wool and linen, I think.
Wool and linen. That's it. So you can't mix wool and linen. So you also can't graft species together. So, for example, you can't graft a species that would give you like an orange and a lemon within the same
like a hybrid tree, yeah.
A hybrid tree. You can't have grapes near things that grow from the ground. There's got to be a certain distance. Remember, we learned that, Arthur, in Bava Basra. Remember in the first daf about having a certain distance. In the first daf of Bava Basra in Israel, we learned it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember with the wall and everything.
Yes. You also can't plow diverse species together. So what does it mean, diverse species? A kosher and non-kosher animal together. You can't have them working together. So in other words, because after the two distinct prohibitions, the one is in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 19, you shall not make your behemoth into another species. So in regard to animal husbandry, you can't pair animals for work together, okay? Because there's another verse in Deuteronomy 22, verse 10, you shall not plow with an ox or a donkey together. So the one is regard to breeding the animals, and the other one is in regard to them working together. So in both cases, it's forbidden to mingle any two domestic animals, or any domestic animal and any wild beast and bird. Does that make sense? They have to be of the same nature. Okay? Also, there's the plowing issue of kilayim and shatnez exactly of what of wool and what
linen.
Wool and linen, yeah. So you can't hitch two animals together that aren't supposed to mix. Okay, read on off.
Okay. I'll do my best not to mispronounce words, as you said. And in regard to the prohibition against having one animal's work on the Shabbos, in every one of these 8 cases, the same rule that applies to an ox or a donkey applies to all domestic animals.
Yeah, it even
Okay.
applies to people. You can't have slaves or maid servants or manservants or animals working for you on that day. It even extends, when you learn the word ox or donkey, to basically anybody that works for you, even human beings. Carry on.
Moreover, any wild beast or bird is legally the same as domestic animals in regard to these 8 issues. If so, why is specifically an ox or a donkey mentioned in connection with falling into a pit? And why are there animal specifications in the other cases? It is not because the law are restricted to these species. Rather, it is because Scripture speaks of the usual case.
Yeah, well, listen, that's self-explanatory. Exactly as Kevin said last time, is that oxen were mainly used for threshing grains, donkeys for beasts of burden used to be able to ride them. Nobody could ride an ox. So it writes the most common things, but it includes culpability for damaging any animal, as well as if those animals damage. So that's the Mishnah in a nutshell. We're going to end in 2 minutes. We're going to hit the Gemara next time, but I thought that Mishnah needed a bit of explanation.